There and back again. A Goggin's Tale. Part 11. Helm's Deep. The king rejoiced at the arrival of Goggin's specially trained battalion. Though the man himself had perished after his fall from the cliff earlier that day, his soldiers brought new hope to the fearful people of Rohan. "Hope returns to us," he roared, and his people cheered. "Open the gate." "My lord," came a cry from behind them. A rider approached and dismounted before the king. He bowed before speaking. "My lord, I bring word of the enemy. I was sent to scout their movements across the lands." "Speak. What news do you bring?" "All Isengard is emptied. There are many tens of thousands, larger and more fell-looking than any orc. At their pace, they will arrive this night." The king's eyes widened in fear, losing the light of hope that had shone in them only moments before. "Tens of thousands, you say?" he asked, his voice faltering. He rubbed his brow with a trembling hand. Aragorn stepped forward. "Do not despair, my lord. For, had the Lord Eomer and his men not returned to serve their king and people, following the prompting of Lord Goggins, then Rohan would now surely be doomed." He gave the king an encouraging smile. "Know also, king, that the warriors of Lord Goggins' battalion are like no other. Even in the most grueling of battles, they neither tire nor falter." "You speak truly, Lord Aragorn," replied Théoden, recomposing himself. He turned back to give instructions. "The warriors of Lord Goggins will be held in reserve behind the wall. Though they have lost their commander, I trust they will deliver a mighty blow to the enemy if the wall is breached." Just then, there came another cry from the wall. "A rider approaches." The king and his men hurried to the battlements, peering into the distance, but they could make out no more than a tiny speck against the horizon. "Legolas, what do your elf eyes see?" asked Aragorn. Legolas squinted, his keen sight straining in the gathering darkness. "I cannot make out anything more in this darkness," he replied, his tone troubled. "Come, my lord," Théoden interrupted. "There is much to set in order before night descends. My men will see to this newcomer." With a final glance beyond the wall, they turned and followed the king back to the hall, where preparations were well underway. Inside the hall, two long tables stretched down the center, their surfaces cluttered with maps, weapons, and half-eaten plates of food. Captains and officers clustered around a large map of the fortress and the Hornburg, their faces grave as they discussed strategy. The air was thick with the smells of leather and sweat, the sound of murmured voices blending with the occasional clink of steel. The officers parted, making space for the king as he approached. He leaned over the map, tracing the fortress's defenses with his finger. In one corner of the hall sat Gollum, wearing a helmet that had been given to him along with chainmail and a short sword by Gimli, who had searched the armories. He fiddled with the helmet, muttering to himself. His pale eyes darted around the bustling hall, and then, as if addressing the shadows, he began to whisper. "The master is gone. Smeagol is free again to take back his precious," he hissed softly. But then, as though another voice emerged from within, he responded in a timid, fearful tone. But master took care of Smeagol," he stammered, curling into himself as if trying to shrink from the weight of his own words. His fingers tightened around the helmet as the darker voice returned, louder and more insistent. "We must take back the precious. We are free now. No more waiting. We will be the master now." Gollum's face twisted in anguish as he answered himself, almost pleading. "But the master is gone. He's gone. He was kind to Smeagol. He trusted us. Master said Smeagol could be brave and good." For a moment, the small, frail figure rocked in silence. The voices in his mind stilled, and his gaze lifted. Around him, warriors moved unaware of the conflict waging within the little creature. For the first time, Gollum felt something foreign stir within his chest. Something deeper than fear or hunger. He had felt it before, briefly, in the company of the Fellowship, and again under Goggin's stern but steady guidance. For the first time in his wretched life, He had felt like he was part of something larger than himself. He had been included, appreciated. "They gave Smeagol armor," he muttered, his voice trembling with a mix of wonder and doubt. "A sword and a place in their hall. They said Smeagol could fight, could help." The darker voice, always lurking, hissed back, quieter now, but still venomous. "Fools, all of them. They'll leave you, hurt you. Always they hurt poor Smeagol." "No," Gollum snapped, his voice rising unexpectedly. A few heads turned briefly in his direction, but most quickly dismissed the strange little creature. He huddled lower, whispering fiercely to himself. "No, not this time. Smeagol won't run away. Smeagol won't hide." He tightened his grip on the sword by his side. It was heavy, almost too much for his thin frame. Master said Smeagol could be good. Master trusted Smeagol. And Smeagol won't betray the Master. For a moment, there was silence in his mind. No voices, no whispers. Gollum stood, his small frame dwarfed by the chaos of the hall. He adjusted his helmet, even as it slipped down to cover his eyes, and straightened his back as much as his stooped figure allowed. "Smeagol fights now," he murmured, clutching the hilt of the sword with both hands. "For the Master. For the precious." A subtle shift had taken root within the creature. It was small, but it was there, a flicker of courage, a sliver of loyalty to something beyond himself. Gollum approached the rest of the fellowship huddled together at one of the tables. "Come sit here, Smeagol," invited Frodo kindly, scooting over to make space at the table. He placed a gentle hand on the empty bench, his kind eyes meeting Gollum's hesitant gaze. For a moment, Gollum wavered, his thin frame trembling with uncertainty. His fingers twitched against the table's edge before he climbed up onto the bench, his helmet slipping forward and obscuring his face. Frodo reached out instinctively, righting the oversized piece of armor with a smile. "You've traveled far, Smeagol. Rest a while," Frodo said softly. Gollum nodded, his wiry hands clinging tightly to the hilt of his sword. Sam, seated across from Frodo, eyed Gollum warily but held his tongue. Frodo leaned forward. "Tell me, Smeagol, before all of this, before the ring, what was your life like?" Gollum froze, his pale eyes wide and unblinking. For a moment, the table fell silent, save for the distant sounds of hurried footsteps and clinking armor in the hall. Finally, Gollum lowered his gaze. Smeagol was. He hesitated, his voice low and unsteady. Smeagol was happy. Yes, happy Smeagol. We lived by the river with our people. Fishing, we did, catching the slimy, wriggling fish in our nets. Oh, how they sparkled in the water, precious little fishies. His tone softened, almost wistful. Smeagol had a friend too, Deagol. We fished together until... The wistful light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a shadow of guilt. Until the precious came to us. Took everything away. Made Smeagol forget the sun, forget the river. He shook his head violently, his hands clawing at his temple. No, don't speak of it. Don't make us remember. Frodo placed a reassuring hand on Gollum's shoulder. You don't have to, Smeagol. Not if it hurts too much. Gollum stilled at the touch, his breathing ragged. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "They hurt us too. The filthy orcs." His voice cracked, his body curling inward as though shielding himself from an unseen blow. Frodo's brow furrowed. What happened, Smeagol? They took us, Gollum hissed, his fingers digging into the wooden table. Chained us up in the dark and did things to us. His voice wavered, growing softer. But they didn't stop. No, never stopped. They hurt us, stretched us, made us bleed with their big black orc. That's enough, Mr. Frodo. Can't you see? Sam's face turned ashen. Let him speak, Frodo said, his voice firm but gentle. Gollum's eyes darted to Sam, then back to Frodo. They broke us, he whispered, his voice trembling. Made Smeagol scream. made Smeagol bleed. We couldn't walk anymore, couldn't stand. So we crawled, and they'd come from behind Smeagol, and then he clutched at his throat, his voice barely audible. They took the precious from us, cut it from us, and threw it into the fire. Frodo's face was pale, his lips parted as if searching for words. I'm so sorry, Smeagol, he said finally. Smeagol doesn't want sorry, Gollum snapped, though his voice lacked its usual venom. Smeagol wants. He hesitated, his gaze lowering to the table. Master Goggin said, he promised, the dwarves would make us a new one. A new precious. Yes, that's why Smeagol fights now. For Master Goggins. For the one who didn't hurt us. Frodo exchanged a glance with Sam, whose eyes were narrowed with distrust but still tinged with reluctant pity. Beside them, the lady sat silently, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from tears. She turned her gaze away when Frodo looked at her, her composure slipping as she rose abruptly from the table. My lady, Aragorn called, stepping toward her. Please, I would break words. But she shook her head, her voice breaking as she said, Forgive me. I cannot bear it. Her skirt brushed the stone floor as she hurried from the hall, her sobs faintly audible as they echoed down the corridor. Aragorn stood still for a moment, his shoulders heavy with the weight of loss. I understand, he murmured softly, more to himself than anyone else. The loss of a mighty man like Goggins is not easily borne. Frodo watched her go, his heart heavy. Turning back to Gollum, he placed a hand on the small creature's arm. You're not alone anymore, Smeagol, he said quietly. We'll stand together in this fight. For the Lord Goggins, and for the hope he gave us all. Gollum blinked at him, his pale eyes glimmering faintly in the firelight. For the first time, a shadow of something akin to gratitude crossed his face. For the Master, he whispered, yes. For the Master. Suddenly, the great wooden doors of the hall swung open with a thunderous creak. The gathered warriors and captains turned as one, weapons half drawn in reflex. But their tension dissolved in an instant when Goggin strode in, flanked by Gandalf. What's good, motherfuckers? The hall erupted in joy. Gimli and the hobbits rushed forward along with Gollum, colliding with Goggins in an unrestrained embrace. All right. Cut that gay shit out, said Goggins, but a rare smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. He fist-bumped Frodo before pushing them off. Aragorn approached, his relief evident as he clasped Goggins in a firm embrace. We thought you had perished, brother. Tell us, what happened after you fell? Goggins shrugged as if brushing off death itself. Fell from that motherfucking cliff, straight into the river. Shit was cold, but I swam to the bank. And then, he paused, his expression turning incredulous. I saw some crazy shit, man. The fucking trees were moving. They must have put LSD in that water. So the tales of the Ents are true, Aragorn murmured, smiling to himself. What the fuck's an Ent? There is no time to explain, Aragorn replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. Battle approaches. We must ready ourselves. Nodding, Goggins turned to Gimli, towering over the stout dwarf. What's up, little man? What's going on here? Gimli adjusted his helm and puffed out his chest. Master, we've been explaining to the king that it's not mere orcs we're fighting. He turned to Théoden. These are fighting Uruk-hai, my lord. Their armor is thick and their shields broad. They are bred for war, stronger and fiercer than any common orc. Nonetheless, we will beat them back, Théoden declared loudly before turning back to his captains. Gandalf stepped forward, smiling at the members of the Fellowship gathered around him. Glad I am to see you all well, he said. How come you were both here, together? Aragorn asked, his gaze shifting between Gandalf and Goggins. After my business in Fangorn, our paths crossed as we turned toward Helm's Deep, Gandalf replied. The Lord Goggins has already informed me of what transpired in the Golden Hall. A blow was indeed struck to Isengard. I would guess it is the reason Saruman now attacks with such reckless haste. But where are Merry and Pippin? Interjected a concerned Frodo. They are with Treebeard and Fangorn, Gandalf assured him. They are quite all right. You need not worry. What is Treebeard? Asked Frodo, but he was cut off by Goggins, who had spotted a troubling sight. What the fuck? The hall fell silent as they turned to see Goggins glaring at the king. We got child soldiers now, he raged. Alas, we have no choice, my Lord Goggins. Either we all fight or we will all die, responded the weary-looking king. You sound like a fucking pussy, spat Goggins. Look, man, this why we got international law. Your ass gonna end up at The Hague. Cut that shit out. Aragorn held up his hand in a calming gesture and muttered something in a softer speech, which Goggins recognized to be that of the elves, but it did not have the desired effect upon the enraged Goggins. Speak English, motherfucker. It is not our place to question the laws of another land. This ain't Africa, motherfucker. We invaded Vietnam for less. The murmurs of the soldiers and captains died down, all eyes on the exchange. Both Aragorn and Goggins looked to the king for a response. The king bowed his head and after a while gave a deep sigh. The Lord Goggins is right, he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. Loath am I to place our young upon the field of battle. If we perish, then they, at least, will have a chance to escape through the caves. The gathered soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Some of the younger recruits, their faces pale with relief, shifted their eyes to the floor. An older captain stepped forward, his brow furrowed. My lord, with respect, if we do not hold, who will shield their escape? The enemy will show no mercy, not even to the children. Goggins turned on the man like a thunderstorm, pointing a finger that might as well have been a blade. Hold up, you stupid motherfucker. You think putting a sword in a kid's hand makes him a warrior? Shit. He roughly grabbed one of the children clad in overly large armor by the neck and swung him around for all to see. You think this lil bitch is gonna do anything other than die out there? He asked, jabbing a finger towards the king. You see the orcs bringing their kids to die here? Nah, you got grown-ass men here. Let them die with honor. The kids can live to rebuild this shithole when it's all over. The king straightened. You speak harsh truths, Lord Goggins, but truths they remain. You are right, their place is not here. I will see to it that the young are taken to the caves immediately. Before anyone could protest further, Goggins clapped his hands sharply, commanding the room's attention. All right, bitches, listen up, he barked, pacing the length of the hall like a drill sergeant. Goggins stood at the center of the hall, his imposing figure commanding immediate attention. His sharp eyes scanned the room, locking on each leader in turn as he barked out his orders. All right, listen up. I've seen some shit, but this ain't gonna be like any other war. You think these motherfuckers care about honor? Hell nah. They're coming to fuck you up, so we're not gonna play their game. He pointed to Boromir, Aragorn, Gimli, and Eomer. You four, you're holding the gate. That's our weakest point. You're the last line of defense, so you better dig in and be ready to bleed. Boromir puffed his chest, nodding proudly. Gimli slammed his axe into the ground with a grunt of approval. Turning to Gandalf, Legolas, Frodo, and Sam, Goggins continued. You're with me. We're holding the wall. That's where the real fight's gonna be. They're gonna come in waves, and we're gonna send those ugly bastards back in pieces. Then his eyes landed on Gollum, who flinched under the weight of the attention. And you, little dude, Goggins said, crouching down to Gollum's level. You're on wall duty too. See something climbing up? You cut it down. No sneaky shit. You stick to the plan, you hear me? Gollum nodded vigorously, muttering, yes, yes, the master trusts Smeagol. Smeagol will fight for the master. Goggins straightened up, clapping his hands to get the room's focus again. "All right, now my battalion," he growled, motioning for their captain to step forward. The soldiers, clad in armor of his design, stood like statues, their discipline a stark contrast to the disorganized militia of Rohan. "You guys are my ace in the hole. You don't move, you don't shoot, you don't do shit without my say-so. Got it?" "Yes, sir," the captain barked, his voice echoing through the hall. "You stay behind the wall, out of sight. If that gate falls or the wall's breached, you hit them hard. But not before. You're my hammer, and I'm not wasting you on the first swing." Eomer turned to Aragorn, Boromir, and Gimli. "My lords, I long for the chance to draw swords together. Boromir of Gondor and Aragorn, son of Arathorn, it is an honor." "Woe to our enemies," responded Aragorn, clapping a hand on his shoulder. With his orders given, Goggins strode out of the hall, the leaders following behind. The air was sharp and cold, the sun dipping low on the horizon. The field before Helm's Deep stretched out like a stage awaiting blood. "All right," said Goggins, cracking his knuckles as he surveyed the terrain. "We got some time before the main event, so let's make it count." From the supplies brought by his battalion, Goggins ordered crates of explosives and mustard gas canisters to be unloaded. "First off, I want C4 planted in the field in a staggered pattern. We're gonna funnel those bastards into kill zones. When they charge, we blow the front lines to hell and make the ones behind them trip over their dead buddies." The men of Rohan, unused to such devices, hesitated. "What you waiting for?" Goggins snapped. "A motherfucking invitation? Move, niggers!" Next, he pointed to the barricades. His men were unloading crude but sturdy wooden constructs reinforced with spikes. "We're setting these up at intervals along the field. If they think they can swarm us, these will slow them down. Thin the herd." Turning to Gandalf, Goggins gestured toward the ramparts. "Old man, you got any more Harry Potter shit? Anything that'll help with crowd control?" Gandalf smiled, his eyes twinkling. "I see your fireworks are superior to mine. No matter. I have some more surprises in store, David." "Good. Keep 'em guessing." "If you could but give me more of what you did on the banks of the Great River," Gandalf asked, his expression a mix of hunger and shame as he scratched at his forearm. "Fucking junkie," muttered Goggins in disgust before turning away. Finally, he addressed the mustard gas canisters. "These are our last resort. If it looks like we're gonna get overrun, we set these off and fall back. It ain't pretty, but watching those fucks suffer is gonna be beautiful." Aragorn frowned, stepping forward. "You'd unleash poison upon the battlefield? What of the land? What of the innocents caught in its wake?" Goggins met his gaze, unflinching. "You think the Uruk-hai give a fuck about the land? Or your innocence? This is war, brother. This shit ugly as hell. You want to die with honor? Fine. But I'm here to make sure we win. And that means we gotta do whatever it takes." Aragorn held his stare for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. "Very well, but let it be a last resort." "It will be," Goggins said, his tone final. "Now get to work." The hours passed quickly as the defenders of Helm's Deep worked tirelessly under Goggins' watchful eye. The explosives were rigged, the barricades set, and the archers positioned along the walls. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the first faint sounds of the enemy army reached their ears, a low, guttural rumble like distant thunder. Goggins stood atop the wall, his arms crossed as he looked out into the growing darkness. "Stay hard," he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. Below him, the defenders of Helm's Deep braced themselves, their faces a mix of fear and hope. And behind the wall, Goggins' battalion waited, silent and ready, like a coiled spring. The Battle of Helm's Deep was about to begin, and under Goggins' command, it would be fought like no battle Middle-earth had ever seen.
Thanks for joining us on this adventure. If you enjoyed the journey and are eager for more wild fan fiction, don't forget to hit that like button, share with your fellow fans, and subscribe for more episodes. And if you're as enchanted by the idea of Middle-earth meeting Hogwarts as we are, make sure to check out our series exploring this magical crossover. Your support brings these worlds to life. Until next time, keep the fantasy alive.